the 24 Lions project is definitely the hallmark that the Cabela family hangs their hat on. This area of Mozambique had not had a wild lion, an apex predator, in it for over 150 years. And that was largely due to an ongoing civil war and poaching. Like, the show Hard Truths of Conservation is shown that Dan travels the world 200 plus days a year, documenting these incredible conservation stories and providing awareness.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Safari Trails. Today, I got a long-wanted guest on here. I got Adam Bender on here. Many of you might know him from his past stuff with his career through Cabela's series with their outdoor stuff. But we're going to dive into some new stuff that he's been on that I think a lot of you guys are going to want to hear. It's a big part of like what I really am passionate about is like helping the conservation side of things and seeing some of these massive projects actually come to life instead of just be talked about on social media like most places do. What they're doing now, they bring them to life. So I'm going to have Adam just give you guys a rundown of his history, kind of where he started, and then we're going to jump in to his new role here. How's it going, Adam?
Awesome. Thanks, Kenzie. Appreciate it. Yeah, so, small town Nebraska kid, raised in the Midwest, hunting, fishing. I mean, it's who I am. It's what I am ever as long as I can remember. Went to college at the University of Nebraska, and I got a journalism degree, and I was going to be a sports writer photographer. I tried doing the wildlife fisheries thing, and then I found out that in order to be a game warden in Nebraska, at least at the time, you pretty much had to wait for somebody to die. And then I also got some really good advice from a current game warden. He's like, you realize if you love to hunt and fish, you got to work when it's the good times to hunt and fish. And I was like, oh yeah, that don't check out. So I shifted majors and I went to journalism just because I always loved writing. And I was a day away from taking a job after graduation in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, which was a suburb of Albuquerque. And I was going to be a sports writer photographer for a weekly newspaper. And a day later, a headhunter actually found my resume from Cabela's, and they said, hey, we're interested. We'd like to talk more. So I still had all my stuff packed up from college because I didn't have a job. I had this nice, big, expensive degree. And I went out to Sydney and I actually took a job as a copywriter. So as a copywriter, I basically got a packet of information about a pair of boots or socks or a gun case, whatever. And then you wrote the copy information about, what it was made of, the specs, the features, etc. And then all of that copy information was put into the catalog or it went on to the internet. So I was doing that for the first couple of years of my kind of professional career. And then in 2009, got married to my wife, Samantha, and we were living in Sydney. She was finishing up nursing school and actually moved up to Powell, Wyoming. So left Sydney and went to work for Eastman's. And when I was at Eastman's, I started as their digital media coordinator. So really helping with all of their websites, social media, e-commerce, things like that. And then through a natural progression over a couple of years, started working as the assistant editor, and then started hunting and filming for the TV show. And absolutely loved my time in Wyoming. I know that's near and dear to your heart. I mean, I miss it greatly. Guy and I were always fly fishing and crazy adventures, and we didn't have kids at the time. So, I mean, pretty much every waking minute of free time was spent, in Yellowstone, fly fishing, going up to Billings, going to Red Lodge, going skiing. I mean, it's just Park County, Wyoming will always be a special place to me. And was up at Eastman's for 3.5 years, and then my first daughter was born in 2013, and knew I wanted to get back home. And, I was raised one grandma a few miles this way, other grandma a couple miles that way. So I wanted to get back and raise my kids close to them. So moved back to Nebraska and went to work for Cabela's club, and then basically started helping manage the club signature events. And that was exclusive high-end hunting and fishing trips and visits to the very best brands around the world and kind of give them like VIP access. So we took people to Austria to watch them build a set of Swarovski binoculars, to Beretta to build a custom shotgun. So all, the biggest of the big brands that you see in a sporting goods store, we were working with those brands behind the scenes to kind of create these one of one VIP field trips for adults, basically, and it was super special. And I think that's really where the outdoor side of what I did really took off. So I mean, we were gone by, we started with just over 20 some trips a year. By the time I left, we were up to 81 trips my last year. So managing a team of a handful of guys, and we worked in partner with Outdoor Adventures, which became WTA tags. And after that, we were basically putting together these VIP hunting and fishing trips for these top end customers that had the Cabela's credit card. And awesome job. I mean, when you're getting paid to travel the world and take people hunting and fishing and be over their shoulder for some of their greatest moments, it was absolutely incredible. Very thankful that I got to do it. Met some incredible people doing it all over the world, and the networking opportunities it afforded me. But I kind of hit a point in my life where it was like I needed to figure out what was next. I'm almost 40. That's scary to say, especially on a podcast. But I wanted to figure out what was next. And lo and behold, last year, Dan Cabela called me up and just kind of out of nowhere. And definitely had no intentions of leaving. I loved my job and I loved what I did and I loved the team that I led. But when Dan Cabela calls, and you're a Cabela's kid from Nebraska, right? You knew the story. You were in the stores as a kid, walking around behind your dad, daydreaming, seeing all the mounts. It was kind of one of those things that was like, this is, something was telling me this is where I got to go. And naturally, here we are. Now I'm the development director for the Cabela Family Foundation.
So that's a perfect segue. Like that's perfect because that gets me into the like I didn't want to like hit on it in the intro. I wanted you to like say it because what what these guys are doing at what you guys are doing through all your projects, all this amazing stuff through the foundation. I think people can learn so much because it's like I said, there's a lot of people that talk the talk on social media about what they've done, what they do, but Dan and family and you guys are out there actually doing what is necessary, showing like putting the money down, but putting the research also down too and the time into it. So let's just start there. I mean, you guys have a lot of different projects. Um, I would like to start on the lion one, if you don't
Sure.
mind, like kind of fill people in on the lion project and kind of let people know what it is, what it entails, and then kind of like explain like how the project benefits wild lions, how the project benefits the knowledge of like future hunting of lions and all that kind of in a way, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So the 24 Lions project is definitely the hallmark that the Cabela family hangs their hat on. In 2018 is when it started. Obviously, talk started before that, but the official was 2018. It was the largest lion trans relocation in the history of the world. There had been lions moved across countries before, but never that many. And 24 was a very large undertaking. And I guess why it happened was because this area of Mozambique, it's called Cutada 11. This area of Mozambique had not had a wild lion, an apex predator, in it for over 150 years. And that was largely due to an ongoing civil war and poaching. So all of the big cats had basically been taken out of this area. So the family was pitched with an idea to basically reintroduce lions. So they worked hand in hand with Mark Haldane from Zambezi Delta Safaris and Ivan Carter's Wildlife Conservation Alliance. And basically, they undertook this massive project to do and one thing that I think is important that you touched on, which I appreciate, is the research, right? The carrying capacity and what's this going to take and what's the ongoing research going to be like, It's one thing to just go move a bunch of wildlife and drop them off and say, see ya, which I think is what a lot of people think happens when it comes to reintroductions of species. But there is boots on the ground, and there's costs associated with that boots on the ground. And it's an ongoing labor of love to keep these animals, not only protected but monitored and researched, because things are always changing, the wet season, the dry season in a place like the Zambezi Delta. So 2018, they introduced the lions, and naturally the whole project takes off, right? They had to create bomas to stage the lions in South Africa, and then they went through the whole laborious process of getting them out of South Africa into Mozambique through customs. I mean, you can imagine the paperwork and the amount of people and the sign-offs that need to bring 24 apex predators from another country in Africa across the border into Beira, and then from Beira into Qatada 11, where then basically they were staged in bomas. They started bringing in, wild game to get them to, used to feeding on their own. And then eventually they were released into the wild. And I think when the released part happens, that's when the thing took off, because it was this great unknown, because there had not been a lion in this area. But when Mark Haldane got to this Qatada 11 in the early 90s, I mean, it was largely decimated. All of the big wildlife were pretty much gone. And that was because of the Civil War and poaching, because the wildlife had no value. And I know it's preaching to the choir. You and a lot of these, listeners will understand that when wildlife has value, that's when it thrives. And Qatada 11 could not be a more poster child of what real conservation looks like, purely because there was nothing there. And now to the point where it is absolutely teeming with wildlife, populations of waterbuck and plains game that are off the charts. A flight from Beira to Qatada 11 absolutely changed my life when I flew there for the first time in 2019. Just seeing the amount of game out on that delta was absolutely incredible. And just to know that it was because of hunting that it rebounded. So when the lions were introduced, they were obviously collared, and the monitoring that was ongoing started to show the travel patterns. And this is where things get really interesting, because you learn so much from that data. And you start to make more informed decisions, and how are they hunting, and where are they spending the majority of their time, and are they crossing into other areas. Now, the shoe on the other foot is informing the community and making the community feel, the people who live with wildlife on a daily basis, informing them of what was going to happen and why these lions are being introduced and what this meant for them now. Was an absolutely massive undertaking. And, now we're approaching almost just shy of 7 years into this project, and it's been a massive, massive success. The amount of lions has absolutely skyrocketed, new cubs being born all the time, new collarings taking place all the time. But it's been a huge learning experience, to the point that with the lion project being so successful, the family then took on the next project, which was the 12 cheetahs. And that was in 2021. So again, just like the cats, no cheetahs had been in this area of Mozambique for a very, very long time, for all the same reasons that the cats were gone: Civil War, poaching, there was no wildlife, there was no food. So a big cat is not going to be able to sustain itself. So basically, the 12 Cheetahs initiative came on the heels of the 24 Lions. An initial same thing. The blueprint was there, right? 24 Lions created the blueprint for how to do this. And they basically took that blueprint and applied it to the cheetahs. And now, today, there is a wild population of lions and cheetahs on the Zambezi Delta that are absolutely thriving. And that's because of, the Cabela family and its partners.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because like you guys have the Instagram and stuff to where you can actually get on. You guys actually give updates of the projects. It's not like you
Right.
just said, "Here's the lines, see you later," obviously, but you're also showing the research. Like it was, it feels like yesterday, but it was probably a couple months ago. The one cheetah had, I think, all the ticks around its eyes that
Yep.
you guys
Yep.
like. So things like that. It's cool to learn like that type of stuff, and that looked brutal. But like things like that, seeing like the updates of both projects kind of happening, sharing like issues with poachers, like anything like that, but also sharing like that you guys didn't just kick them out and say, "See you later, have fun," because I mean, obviously that probably would have not. I mean, there's no probably that would have not worked. They would have been
100%. I mean, that cheetah with the
toast.
ticks, to your point, would have absolutely perished. But
Yeah,
it's because that she had a collar that they started to see that, okay, she's not moving, and they could monitor that, like something's off. And then when they flew in and they did an aerial patrol, they could see from up above, like, ooh, something's wrong. Now, naturally, when you're doing conservation like this, you want to keep as little hands-on intervention as possible. But sometimes it's necessary. And this was one of those cases where they flew in, discovered that she had a wound. They're not exactly sure. It could have been a reed buck or some type of horned antelope that had gored it in the back end, and it had created an infection. And then naturally, that's what Mother Nature does. It sensed a weak animal, and the ticks basically went in because of a compromised immune system. But the team was able to go in, remove all the ticks, heal the wound the best they could, and push antibiotics and fluid, and get the cheetah back up on her feet and started moving off into the wild again, just like normal.
that's cool. That's cool to hear. So what is speaking of both those projects, obviously 24 and 12. Do you have an idea of what the numbers are of today on each of those?
So I do. They're a little cautious to,
Yeah,
put them out there. But what I
fair
would
enough.
say is, but what I would say is, the family has. Well, I guess I could put it like this. I mean, with the lions, it's more than basically 5x to population from the initial 24. The cheetahs are obviously behind that because it's newer. Cheetahs don't have as much breeding capacity, and the litters are smaller. But I mean, obviously, it's a very healthy population. Still continuing to grow. Like we just sent out the email last week and put on social. One of the founder females, the Pilanesberg female, had three cubs, and they discovered that again through the monitoring. And basically, the monitoring had said that, man, she's in an area that's super super thick. She's not moving, so it's one of two things, right? She's either sick, hurt, potentially dead, or she could possibly have cubs. And they waited, especially because with the cubs, with their being so new, they go into isolation because naturally there's lions in the area, so they're going to try and hide those cubs to get them the best chance of survival possible. And they went in about 10 days after she stopped, and sure enough, three cubs were pictured from the aerial helicopter. And that's one of the cool things, like I said, or you said, about social media is, that's one of the very most unique things about those projects is it's ongoing. There's always things happening. Poaching still does happen. Just because it has a collar and just because there's monitoring does not mean that they're out of the woods from the possibility of being poached. So keeping the people that are followers, right, updated on new births, on bad news, on good news, all that stuff, it really gives a sense of people being invested into the project versus just kind of a flash in the pan, right? And I think that that's one of those things that I think is so unique about those projects is because it was not just a get in, get out. It was a, hey, we're going to get in, we're going to commit to this, we're going to keep it going, and we're going to make sure it's successful and grow. And yeah, I mean, to have that many lions on the ground now and new litters continually being born, now there's starting to be generations formed off of the original transplants. I mean, it's super super cool, and it's very very rewarding work because it's a lot bigger than yourself. And I know that you touched on this earlier. I've said it multiple times. I got blasted by Robbie Kroger for it. He used it as the quote on the podcast. So thanks, Boana. There's hashtag conservation and there's real conservation. And I think that unfortunately, that was kind of where I was at in my career. I could see where things were going and how it was really cool to talk about conservation. And it was really cool to tag NGOs and do all that stuff. And they all have their place, and that's fine. But like, I guess for me, like my legacy piece is I wanted to be a part of something bigger than that. I wanted to go actually do it. And I actually wanted to be boots on the ground and be responsible for making some of these things happen and getting partners to get on board to see the value that, this foundation is doing and what they're creating. And that's obviously what the Cabela Family Foundation offered me.
And that's awesome. And it's just like the fact that people, like you touched on before, it's like the fact that people can be on social media at home or at work, like most people are on it at work, but like they can feel like they are a part of it by watching your guys's, progression and like you said, sharing the struggles, all that stuff. but then also whenever there comes a time when someone can, if you guys ask for like volunteers or ask for some sort of like, hey, if you guys want to pitch in on this or whatever, it people feel like they've already been invested, and they see where their time or money would go to it, instead of just like some of these nonprofits, especially like, I'm not being rude, but pushing towards the antis, you know, they're always just like, give us money, but you don't really see any, like, you don't feel invested in a lot of that. To where like you guys are like, if there ever comes a time or whatever, people feel invested to it. You know what I mean? It feels like you're already a part of it just because you can follow along and enjoy it. That simply
And
is
I
what
think
I feel
and I
like.
think you pointed out something super important. If you look at like our heat maps of like when social posts go out and where a lot of followers are from, I mean it's incredible to see the amount of followers from the Europe and UK. And
Oh, that's good.
I can about guarantee you that the vast majority of them are not hunters.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's what makes the family's message so compelling, right? They did all this as hunters. They funded all of this as a family who, founded the world's foremost outfitter in 1961. And they cared so much about wildlife that they wanted to make this major investment to take on this huge, risky undertaking to benefit wildlife and try and, rebuild this landscape and this ecosystem into what it was prior to a civil war and to poaching that absolutely decimated it. And I think that that's like one of the coolest messages is that you can have hunting and you can have thriving wildlife, and they can absolutely coincide with each other. And when you talk about antis, I get it. There's so much a negative connotation, and I get it because we're usually we only as hunters we only focus on the far opposite side of us. What I think we need to do as hunters and conservationists is understand that there's a lot more people in the middle. There's a lot more people that don't really know one way or the other. I'm not really for hunting. I'm not against it. I just don't really know where I am. And that's, I think, one thing that the foundation has done through things like, the show Hard Truths of Conservation is shown that Dan travels the world 200 plus days a year, documenting these incredible conservation stories and providing awareness to what's going on out there and what hunting does through social economic impact. And I think that when you present it in a way that is factual and it's done in a professional and clean way, I think we can, our audience spreads awareness a lot further and a lot better. So often I know you and I have chatted on this before, but grip and grins and things like that, they absolutely have their place. We understand that. I know there was a big push several years ago to not do that anymore, whatever. They have their place, but I think when they're done properly and they tell the right story and it's not so much of a brag or an ego post, I understand. I think that the message just resonates with those people who are in the middle. Yeah, we're never going to get somebody that's completely staunchly against it. We know that. We can do our best, but you're fighting an uphill battle. But I think the focus needs to be on those people who don't really know, and they're kind of undecided. And I think that through social media is a big one, right? And that just goes to demonstrate when you see all the followers and the impact and engagement from posts, and it's overseas. Deduction of reasoning can show you that it's probably non-hunters. But the crux of the matter is all of that was made possible by hunters.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets like, for me, like everyone says, we need more hunters. Like essentially, I don't like when you go out here in Wyoming on public land, and you look at like, hell no, we don't need more hunters.
The
We
data
need more
would
people.
suggest otherwise. You're right.
Yeah, but we need more people okay with hunting, which is the people in the middle. It's like, obviously, and the big thing is there's like issues happened here with that wolf in Wyoming a few months ago. Like, true hunters aren't cool with that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and I think people need to realize that us all together, we're all like have the same common wants and needs. We want to be able to go see elephants in the park. We want to be able to do all these cool things and see a wildlife in its natural habitat in the end of the day, you know what I mean? And experience that for future generations to come. It's not like we're out here just wanting to ravage the earth and take everything out. That was what poachers did and the movement of people did. And I think especially for people to like go back on the point of your guys' projects, but then the hard truth stuff is Dan travels, you guys are traveling to different places, because I think obviously everyone says the American conservation model is the biggest. I feel like everywhere else has been doing a better job in like Africa, and you got Asia with the markhors. Like I think everywhere else has almost been doing a better job in actually implementing what we quote unquote built. I feel like our true model of conservation has kind of went to the side a little bit to like more money in a way. But then when you see Dan going to these places and showcasing like, hey, you know, the bongo, because I was watching the one about the bongo, that was in season one, right?
Yep.
I was watching that one because now they're on YouTube. If no one has TV, they can get on YouTube and watch them. That's where I watch them. But like, it's just showcasing that like the freaking Kenyan mountain bongo, like the population has dwindled to hundreds. There's only a couple hundred left. But then when you go to Central African Republic or Cameroon or the Congo, that Western bongo, they're flourishing, but it's because they've been huntable.
Right. And that's and to your point about the North American model, I mean, absolutely. The North American model of conservation is absolutely the most widely successful conservation model in the world. And absolutely other countries have looked to implement it. Now, granted, they don't necessarily sometimes have the infrastructure to do it, and they definitely don't have the money that generates
Yeah.
through things like Pittman Robertson and all these different NGOs that are raising money, and you got large organizations like Safari Club International. Um, it's a very convoluted issue. I mean, there's definitely no doubt about it. But I think at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. We all want more wildlife and healthier ecosystems. And I think people that are against hunting would say the same thing. The difference becomes how do we get there? And I think it's important to point out things like what you just said with bongo. I mean, in areas where they are hunted and they have value, flourishing. In areas where they're protected and there's no hunting, dwindling down to nothing. Now you look at the population, I mean, in places like Texas, that are flourishing with these bongo, even through landowners like Dan that are raising these, bongo now. It's absolutely imperative that people understand that you can have your opinion. You absolutely can. But you got to be able to listen, and you have to be able to decipher information at face value and kind of point things out as here's where this is, and here's the facts that support it, and then all of the opinions and all that stuff is kind of to the side, and then you decipher a message from that. I think what you pointed out about the wolf thing, that was probably one of the most recent times that I've seen hunters speak out against the actions of another hunter. And I think that that's largely with social media today. There's this notion that we got to support each other and everybody has to be supportive, and we can't have opinions that go against the narrative of hunting. But I think that's a really dangerous place to be, because with when things like that happen, hunters need to be willing to lock arms and say, no, this ain't right. I mean, look at what's going on right now in Colorado.
Yeah.
I think that the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management is doing a fantastic job of educating the public on just what could happen if this ballot box ideology starts to take over some of the way that wildlife is managed. And I think that that's where education is one thing, but then rolling up your sleeves and going and practicing it is another. And I think that that's a big push that we've seen on social media, is a lot of people, to your point, how you kick things off, like a lot of people love to talk, but and then they have this, like with the mountain lions and the bobcats in Colorado, like, well, that don't affect me, right? It's never going to affect me. What they fail to realize is that's a statutory measure that if that language goes and it's passed and it becomes law, it will become a precedent that then they can try the same exact thing in your state. And unfortunately, look at history, right? That's there's that one meme. I've seen it multiple times. I can't recite it, but it's like, they came for the hound hunters and I did nothing. They came for the whatever, I did nothing. Then they came for me and it was too late. That's exactly like where I think hunting and conservation is today, because so much of this stuff is, well, the stuff happened in Africa. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't impact me.
That's the thing that bugs me the most. Like, I'm sorry if it offends anyone, but like especially with this Colorado stuff, you see so many people like, and I think it's cool. Like, there's a lot of people speaking up, but you see so many hunters, not like organizations, just like your normal guys that are hunters that are like just beating their chest. But then I ask them like, well, why didn't you do that when the Cecil lion issue happened? It's just, it all means the same. Like, I don't care who you are, we're all hunters. And the thing is, with the big nonprofits that are fighting against hunting, if they stop hunting in one place, that doesn't mean they're going to stop there. They're going to start ticking the box whether they just do Africa, Asia first, and UK and Europe and all that, whether they do that first, North America's still on their list. They will come
Oh, and that's
eventually
and
for
that's
everything here.
you're exactly right, and that's why this Colorado one is such a big deal because of it being a statutory uh, issue that it will become law, and then once it becomes law, it becomes the litmus test that all other states will measure against. And it just sets a really dangerous precedent to go
Yeah.
against, science-based wildlife management by a state agency. It's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of, to your point, the people that are trying to get this passed are putting out misinformation that is just vehemently not true. But that's the way ballot box ideology works. It doesn't matter as long as they get enough signatures and as long as they get enough people to vote yes, hunters will suffer the consequences. And then what's going to happen is not only hunters, but the person or thing that will suffer the most is the wildlife.
Yeah.
If something like that would pass, heaven forbid, whether you're for or against hunting, years down the road, you're going to look and you're going to go, why is there no more deer and elk in Estes? Like, what's going
Yeah.
on? Why is there no elk walking downtown? Well, you took predator management out of the state's hands, and now there is nothing to manage these predators. Therefore, there's nothing to keep the balance in check, and now you have no more deer and elk. And I know it will take years for that to happen, but it absolutely, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It
Yeah.
absolutely will happen. And I think that that's why it's so important, like you said, for hunters to band together for the right things and understand which battles are worth fighting. And because otherwise, if you just sit out here on this island that doesn't impact me, I'm in Nebraska. Why would I, why should what happens in Nebraska care? I don't hunt mountain lions. I mean, yes, we now have a mountain lion season in Nebraska. It's very, very small. I mean, a couple per year, and once the coda's done, it's over. Uh, but again, it sets a dangerous, dangerous precedent. And I think that to exactly what you said, it will open up Pandora's box, and that's what should be concerning for people who call themselves a hunter, an outdoorsman, an angler. It's not a matter of when it will, if it'll impact you. It's a matter of when.
Yeah, for sure. And since we're kind of on this topic of like the Colorado issues, and what I think is it's kind of it's crazy how different these are. How you guys can go introduce lions and cheetahs into a country that hasn't had them for a long time, but then you take wolves to Colorado. There's a big difference here. The management and the overseeing of those lions and cheetahs is exponentially higher than it is when they just go kick those wolves out of the box. There's like after that, there's just like that's pretty much what they're doing, and they're hoping they reproduce, and they're not going to manage them like you guys are managing your populations of your cheetahs and your lions because this is another big thing I always think is kind of funny. Like if you go to Africa, you can go to anywhere, Zambia, Tanzania. You obviously see this in Mozambique, but the amount of game on and like where these wild places are where you have lions, you have leopards, you have wild dogs, you have these places that have these top apex predators, but there's still a lot of game. It's kind of amazing how they kind of coincide. But then when you start to look at how it is like here in Wyoming, like around Yellowstone, the the moose population has went down. It's just kind of funny how the management doesn't correlate. And I just think that's another thing that people need to start to pay attention to is look how Africa's managed their apex predators, even within these hunting ecosystems and stuff, because they flourish. The game flourishes, the predators flourish. It all kind of like lives together. But in North America here, it seems like they're kind of always battling against each other, whether we're going to have deer tomorrow or wolves tomorrow or moose tomorrow type of deal. I don't know what your
I
opinion
always
is on that.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. And as an ex Park County resident, where Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, Eastern Gate is right outside of Cody. I you know I always wished I could have saw Yellowstone back when Roosevelt first visited, and he went on his first voyage because he wanted to see the West and how it was untamed. I always wished I could have seen what the wildlife was back like then. I think it would have been absolutely amazing because now, if you want to go see bison, absolutely the best place in the world to go see bison, and a whole lot of cars backed up for miles for one grizzly bear outside, Mammoth. Um, Look, I mean, it's a certainly touchy subject, right? Because you can have all the information in the world, and people could understand, what it takes to manage a population of wild lions and wild cheetahs in Africa, and how that's different than what a state agency can do in Colorado. I mean, there's lots of different idiosyncrasies there. I think what it comes down to is that people need to be willing to have an open mind when it comes to some of these topics, and I think that unfortunately for many people, it's a cut and dry yes or no. I'm either for it or against it. And what they don't understand is the byproduct of having that kind of polarizing mentality. And I think that's what you're facing with issues like Colorado and wolves across the West, right? I mean, go look at Idaho. I mean, Idaho elk hunting now is a fraction of what it used to be. If you talk to people that hunt Idaho a lot, they'll tell you why. But again, proper management is a necessary portion to all conservation-based decisions. And I think that is where platforms like social media can be so beneficial and can be so bad on spreading that message. And, it always feels like you're fighting an uphill battle, right? And, walking to school uphill through snow both ways. But I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of hunters are in the right place. But I think there's far too many hunters that have this kind of passive, it doesn't impact me. It's not a big deal. I don't need to get involved. And that's where it's the most dangerous. And I think that as you look at all these issues that we're facing in the US, that's where we stand to lose everything. In my kids' lifetime, their kids' lifetime, I don't know when it will happen. But there's other places around the world that you can look to, Europe, for what's happened to hunting. And
Yeah.
it's not a matter of if it can happen here, it's when. And I know I've said that like 3 or 4 times, but it's like it's the truth. And I think like we are at this point, kind of almost like a precipice, that some of these things that are happening, they're all snowballing. And if hunters don't, get their act together, you stand to lose everything.
Yeah, no, I think it's like a pivotal moment in our lifetime and for future lifetimes that we all decide, hey, just because I like to hunt ducks or just because I hunt mule deer, I probably should help support this other stuff because sooner or later, the shit that I like is going to be gone too.
And I think that's what's so cool, Kenzie, about people like you, the younger side of this industry, right? I mean, look at the volume, people like your dad, my dad, the volume that baby boomers are getting out of the industry, purchasing less gear, purchasing less licenses. You look at what land access has happened, just finding places to hunt. You talked about, trailheads in Wyoming, et cetera.
Yeah.
The odds are not stacked for us. I mean, they're absolutely stacked against us. And somebody has to carry that torch. And that's what I think, I've had several conversations in the last 6 months with, that younger demographic of, the next generation of leaders, because the people like our fathers are getting out. They're hitting retirement age and they want to enjoy, the rest of their life, not working so hard. And I think that's more than fair. They've earned that, but somebody has to pick that up. And that's a big cross to carry. And if we're not going to pick it up, you don't get to point the finger when bad things happen. And that's kind of always been my mantra with this whole thing. Like if you're not willing to speak up and you're not willing to do something about it, you don't get to complain when things go not your way.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that to me, that's how it seems like the world is, period, whether it's hunting,
It's society.
politics, and it's
Yeah.
society. Yeah. Yeah. They
I mean,
always
it's
like to sit
everything
on
is
their
oil
hands.
and water. There is no compromise, right? You're left, you're right. You're pro-choice, you're pro-life. There's all these things. There's no compromise. There's no, no even having a discussion anymore. I mean, just
Yeah.
think about that. I mean, that's a scary, scary world to live in. I mean, I look at the way I was raised, and I look at the way that now I'm raising my kids and the things that they're dealing with, and the technology that they have, and the societal issues that are now in as a part of their classrooms, et cetera. I mean, this is stuff that I never dreamed of as a kid. I mean, I was worried about the snack I was going to eat, and I was going to watch, Hey Dude or Little Bobby's World when I got home from school that day. I mean, like the things that are on their radar now, I mean, are just light years beyond anything that we ever had to deal with. And I think that's where it's like, okay, times have changed. It is not as simple as it was for your dad and my dad growing up where, there was a gun in the pickup every single day they went to school because there was a potential that their buddies were going to say, hey, we're going to go up, this trailhead this afternoon and look for a deer for Jake. That was a real situation. Today, those days are gone.
Yeah.
In the areas that they still are, obviously they're trying their best to hang on to them, but society would tell you that eventually it's going to be gone. And living in, as the rural areas become less and less and less of a focus on society and more on these big metropolitan areas, and that's where, the vote is happening, and that's where all of the measures are being taken to get signatures for things like, the Colorado stuff. It's not rocket science to see what's going on. And I think that that's why, you need that younger generation to be able to want to do something about it. And that's what I think is so cool about, guys like yourself picking up that torch.
Yeah, and I think it's just a thing that, to me, it's like it's something we have to do because, like you pointed out, there were times were different, especially because I'm almost 30, like I'm 10 years younger than you roughly, but still, I didn't have we didn't have the same issues that your kids are having right now at school. Like the same thing as like, what am I going to eat after school today? Like that was my problem, and like to me, it was like I always look at like I love social media, but I hate it now. Like I hate it, but love it. And it's just like we were so better off without it, essentially, for so many things, but we're so much better with it for certain
Yep.
things as well. And it's just about putting that right information out there. And it goes back to the grip and grin thing. I talked about this the other day, just in my head, but it's just like, okay, if we're not going to post like me, you, Dan, Robbie, any of these guys, if we're not going to post correct grip and grin photos or trophy photos, whatever you want to call them, if we're not going to post correct ones, but we're going to let Bobby and Billy post the ones with them with a beer in their hands, straddling the deer, we're going to let that image be the only one that gets seen. I don't think that's fair. I think we as hunters and like people like passionate about, we need to post as much good quality stuff as possible to try to outweigh the few little bits of negative, because I really don't think there's as much negative as there is. But I think it's just that it gets that few negative things get spotlighted so much more than the positive, and that happens in every scenario in every case in life. But I think it's just like our job to actually post quality content to help people realize that we're not bad human beings, that we love wildlife just as much as they do. And there's a big part of like the educational thing. Like my buddy, one of my dad's buddies actually, he lives in Kentucky, and his kids do like archery with the school program,
Yep.
and they've been traveling all over this. Like we didn't have that. We still don't have that here where I live. I live in the smallest town. But I would have loved to have something like that. And I think that's super cool. Like they just went to Florida and did like some competition. Like it's really I think it's super cool to see because they live in Lexington. So it's a big metropolitan type area.
Yep.
Obviously it's like subdivided and stuff, but still it's like a big city area, but they're getting kids involved in the outdoors, whether they like to hunt with it later on or not. Like I think it's a very key thing, at least they have the knowledge and like they can kind of see the background of ancestries of people hunting with bows and arrows and like kind of like the outdoor side of things. I think that's super cool, and I just think more people need to be involved in preaching and showcasing the benefits of it all, because in the end it comes down to we're all hunters and we need to help each other out in the long term of things.
And I think you're exactly right. I mean, social media is the largest platform that people consume information on today. I mean, growing up, my parents watched the news every night after dinner. I mean, that was just what you did. You flipped on the TV, news was on. Newspapers. I mean, all those things have gone by the wayside now, and it's all this thing. You consume everything from that. So, with that in mind, I think people need to understand that if that's where people are getting information, good, bad, and ugly, what type of message are you portraying? And again, whether you're for trophy photos, against trophy photos, I think Dan and I had this discussion lately, about it because we were talking about a well-known person in the industry that was vehemently against it and said never again, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, well, that's the end point, right? Everybody understands as a hunting that is the end point, but there was so much that happened before that. Before even the hunt took place, the planning, the preparation, the phone calls, the emails, the WhatsApps. I mean, there's so much stuff that happened that we all forget. And then we only put up that one tiny little sliver moment that we know the vast majority of people that are against hunting are going to see. And they're just like, nope, off. And I guess one thing I've always tried to personally do and help people understand is that, tell the story. There's far more to this than just that little segment of time. And do so in a classy and professional and respectful way. Because their message against it becomes a lot harder to argue with when you can talk about, the economic side, the social side, the conservation side, than just back of your truck with a beer, grip and grin. And that's fine. Though there's people that will never do anything but that, and it's totally fine. But you have to understand that if you want to make change, you've got to bring about change through your own actions. You're never going to be able to convince a guy who's always done that type of photo to change. And you got to respect that. I mean, that's what, I've had conversations with people like this. He's like, that's just what my dad taught me. We put the deer in the back of the truck and then we took the picture. That's what we did. That's fine. But if you have an opportunity to make a difference, to shine even just a little bit of positive light on hunting and conservation and the message that it sends, do it. I mean, that you have the world's most powerful device for message dissemination in your pocket. So it's like, why not use it for good? And I think that I'd like to think we're making headway in getting people to think that way, and getting people to see that, it's more about the story, it's more about the moment, it's about the people involved, the way that the sage smelled right before you pulled the trigger. I mean, there's all those things. And I think that when you do that, it just creates a much better notion of what hunting is, because everybody understands. And that's like something on Hard Truths. We don't ever show a kill shot, ever. And it's just not necessary. Everybody understands what happens when the gun goes off. Everybody knows how it gets from point A to point B. So I think that, accepting that and saying that we're not shying away from it, it's just not vital to the story. The story is about what happened before, and then all of the impact that will come after.
No, and I agree. And that, like, again, one of the hard truths things is like, I love the episode because the bongo one, I was just like going through my mind. The bongo one was about the game ranching in Texas. Like, it doesn't have to be the grip and grin kill shot every series, like, or every episode, because that's a great point right there. It's just like, you guys went with Brian Gilroy and you guys did the whole thing of like them catching the bongo, like what they were going to do. And then you showed the auctions and stuff like that. But then also, again, to the point, it shares the story of Dan on these hunts. Like, whether you guys are in Argentina, like you guys recently were, you're in Africa, whether you're in Pakistan, like, it shows the story, but also it shows, I think, and this is why I think international hunting does a little bit better of it too, because there's so many different people involved in these hunts. It
Yep.
shows the benefit a little bit more than me just going to my gas station, buy my over-the-counter Wyoming tag. Sure, someone got some money in between there. Maybe I bought, some snacks, whatever, at the gas station, benefited in that way too. But doing a DIY hunt myself doesn't really show the benefits of some of these guided hunts, especially international, where you have, 10 people in Pakistan following around, they're looking at the aerial. Like, it kind of shows the bigger picture of hunting and how much value it actually brings to, especially these places that have very little income or even an income at all type of deal, which I
It's
think is
e-
sweet.
it's
That's why I like those hard truths videos.
it's easier to see the impact internationally because
Yeah.
they don't have the model that we do. They don't have Pittman Robinson. They don't have 11% of, sales on ammunition and accessories going directly towards a general fund that benefits hunting, fishing, and conservation. They don't have those things. So the best thing they have is they have a resource that is worth money, and they know that if they can protect that resource and give it value, they can continue to make money from it. And I think that you're right. The impact is a heck of a lot easier to see internationally. And that's just, international hunting, it gets a really bad rap for a lot of different reasons. But I think the one thing that I wish people could see is exactly that. I wish people could see the impact that a 7-day plains game safari to South Africa has, and the amount of money that it generates, and the amount of food that will go into people's bellies that wouldn't have happened if that safari did not happen. And it's especially important in places like you said in Asia. I mean, the amount of logistics to make some of that stuff happen is absolutely mind blowing, and that's why those hunts cost what they cost. It's far more about what it takes to pull it off than just the animal itself. But again, by giving that animal value, all of those other things can happen. And I think that again, it ties back to social media, right? Like, what story are you telling through the posts that you share and the things that you're putting out there? And is it, beneficial to the narrative around hunting, fishing, and conservation today? And I mean, I think if more people just stopped and paused and thought about that before they, ran to post photos or, comment on people doing, terrible behavior that puts a puts a bad light on hunting and fishing, I just think we'd all be better for it. And I know that it's not popular to talk about. I get it. And like, I've been on the receiving end of, people saying, oh, you think you're better than everybody. It's like, no, I'm absolutely not better than anybody. I just am going to choose to try and, make my platform be a platform for good and spread awareness and conservation messaging through a professional, clean, well done format, because I know what I'm up against the general public. And I think that when you realize that at some point in your life, everybody has that kind of moment where it's like, okay, got it. I mean, I'm definitely not proud of things that I did as a young kid, in high school, hunting coons and things like that. I mean, that absolutely was part of who I was as a hunter when we grew up. Buddies would get together Friday night after football game and go coon hunting on the local creek. It absolutely fine. Everything was legal, all that stuff. But at the same time, like I look back and I'm like, but that's just a part of growing up, right? And I think that that's where I'm at in my career. I want to go be an agent of change and be able to leave my mark on something and say, you know what, I made every attempt I could to leave it better than I found it. And I want my kids someday to be able to go experience Africa like you and I have and see wild elephants and wild rhinoceros. I don't want them to only be able to place to see a black rhino in the wild or is in a zoo, and
Yeah.
like zoos have their place, don't get me wrong. But if it weren't for hunting and conservation and the dollars that go into anti-poaching to keep some of these rhino alive, there's a chance, a realistic chance that rhino will be gone in your and I lifetime in the wild. I
Yeah.
mean, it just absolutely is true. And I think that it's only through hunting are you going to be able to save those, and so that my kids can go someday and see it and see a white rhino with its calf in the wild. It's just it's a real reality, man. And I think that once people realize that, they start to look at things through a different lens. And I think that that's what we need people to start doing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I appreciate you taking the time to go over all this and explain things. To leave people with some stuff here, what projects can you talk about that you have coming up? Like what projects are currently ongoing? Like, is there anything that you can kind of fill us in on that's happening right now that isn't the 12 line or isn't the cheetahs and isn't the 24 lines? Is there any kind of stuff you got going on right now?
So obviously the Lions and the Cheaters are still ongoing.
Yep.
We do have plans to do something pretty special next year, kind of alluded to, 5x the population of lions. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So we've got big plans for that project in the next year. And then there's lots of smaller things happening within Hard Truths. Hard Truths does a really good job of shining light on, kind of spotlighting some things that are going on. You said earlier, with Patagonia. We went down there and filmed an episode of Hard Truths about the Waymold deer. I'll be honest, prior to that, I had no idea what a Waymold deer was. I'd never heard of it, nothing. And then through Dan and this program, he was invited down by this couple that basically moved down there in the 90s to try and save this deer. He's from Switzerland, she's from California. They get married, they move down to Patagonia, and they live up on the border between Argentina and Chile. They encounter this deer, and they basically started only the second research center in the world on Waymold deer. The other one is right across the border in Chile. I mean, there's less than 1,500 Waymold deer left in the wild. That's the best educated guess. And what they're trying to do is figure out, obviously, poaching was the number one cause as to why they were killed. I mean, they basically were almost killed to extinction because of poaching. And then there's all kinds of other things happening, like there's nutrition deficiencies. These deer aren't living very long, and they're picking up skulls down on the beach, down around these lakes up in the Andes, and they can't figure out why these deer aren't living to barely older than 5 years old, which is very young for a deer to live to. So that's one that's coming up on a future episode of Hard Truths. And then there's a myriad of other things going on with black bear. We're looking at some stuff with mule deer, and then there's some always sheep conservation. Dan and the family are really really big on sheep. Naturally, anybody who's ever hunted sheep understands the allure and understands what that animal means to a mountain hunter. So lots and lots of good stuff in the works. Hard Truths is absolutely the venue that it will go out and people will become aware. The next season is getting ready to air this August, so it'll air this August, end of August. Airs on the History Channel, and then, like you said, goes on YouTube approximately 2 weeks after it airs. on there. So that's obviously the best place where people can stay up to date on what the family is doing as far as some of those initiatives.
Cool. And I'm glad you actually, that was going to be a question. Is like how long between the initial airing on TV that it shows up on YouTube. And I think it's sweet that you guys are so quick. Instead of waiting a full year, wait until the season's over, you can start to upload those sooner, because then it just lets people like be able to get that information sooner instead of having to wait, oh, I didn't watch it on TV air during August and September and October or whatever. So you have to wait till July for it to come out. But no, it's like back to back to back, which is super sweet. And then another thing is, again, like I know we talked quite a bit about the projects in Africa and stuff like that, but you guys are doing much more than just Africa, which is great that you brought that up. Mule deer, sheep. It's Dan and you guys aren't just focusing on Africa. You're focusing on every aspect of conservation, every aspect of the world, and picking things and being able to highlight that and the success of the conservation through it, which I find really great, and which I think a lot of people should just really obviously go subscribe to the YouTube channel, watch it on TV, follow you guys on social media, because then also it gives them the aspect of being able to follow along and understand that it's not just about Africa, which I think a lot
Yeah,
of people
and
probably label me as
Dick,
just Africa.
yeah, well, hey, I mean, you've spent a lot of time there, so I get it. But, Dick and Mary Cabela absolutely loved Africa. It was their favorite place in the world. That was their words. So that felt like a natural place to go make a difference and start. But I would absolutely say that, Dan and the family totally understand that if we really want to resonate with people, we've got to start doing more things closer to home. And there's a lot of things in the pipeline, a lot of super, super exciting work, a lot of partners coming on board that have said, hey, we're going to follow your lead. We want to be a part of this. So that's, where my job has come in, and is to go out and find those people who really want to go be agents of change and make a difference in hunting, fishing, conservation in North America. And yeah, I'm super excited for what's to come. We're only 7 months in, but Dan and I were just talking the other day, like it's crazy what's happened in 7 months, and what are we going to be saying a couple years from now on where this is all going? The things that we have planned, the things that we're hearing about. Dan gets stuff brought to him all the time. Just the things that we're hearing about and the opportunities that are happening are just going to be. I mean, it's going to be big, and I don't think there's any signs of slowing down.
Sweet. Well, we'll end it with that, but let's have you tell people where exactly they can follow you personally, where they can follow Dan, where they can follow the foundation, kind of lay out all the platforms. There's kind of a few there to get a hold of.
Yeah, so Cabela Family Foundation is probably the largest platform on social media, Instagram and Facebook. And then Dan's personal is just his name. My personal is just my name. And yeah, I mean, we post a lot of telling the stories through our perspective too. Dan documents every single Hard Truths episode, and he does a really good job of telling that story from start to finish, before and after, every single trip that he goes on. And it's unique, right? You could only take the kill shot or the trophy photo and only post that, but it's just so much more important to tell that whole story about the people that are involved. So YouTube channel as well, that's where you can view all of season 1 and season 2 in its entirety. All 24 episodes are up there. Every content in between. You've mentioned a lot of them today. There's some really, really impactful episodes in there that I think that if people just watched and looked, I think they would, come away with maybe even a slightly bit of different point of view. And that's, all we can ask for.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I appreciate you hopping on, Adam. I really do, man. I think it's awesome what you guys are doing. I wanted to try to, get that out to my small audience to let them know, like, the cool stuff that you guys are doing through the foundation, through all your personal stuff. And I'd love to have have you on again. I know we talked about Dan never being on, but we should really just try to pull his arm just to see if he'll be on later on in life. But I appreciate you taking the time today, man. It really means a lot to me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kenzie, and keep up the good work. I appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Well, guys, thanks for listening to this episode. I'll drop a link to all of the platforms they're on and the YouTube channel for you guys to go and enjoy all this cool content. Make sure you guys follow them, because they are really making a change and doing a difference in life when it comes to conservation and future of hunting. Thank you guys for watching, listening to this episode. Until next time.